If you ladies leave my garage, if you survive mechanics training, you will be a weapon. You will be a minister of tools praying for a little old lady with Social Security to help her out. But until that day, you are pukes. You're the lowest form of life on earth. You're not even human beings. You're nothing more than unorganized, grabastic pieces of amphibian shit. Because I am hard, you will not like me. But the more I am hard, the more you will learn. Today, you pukes will be changing a timing belt on a 2002 Volkswagen Golf GTI, model 337. This car has an L4 turbocharged engine. By going to autocheck.com, we found out that it was manufactured in Brazil. We are not sure why. Maybe the Germans felt safe because Jesus was looking over it on Corcovado Hill. I do not know. This is only one vehicle that we are covering. If you would like more information on other vehicles, I suggest you turds get on YouTube and look up Scotty Kilmer. That gun-toting U.S. Army soldier treated the motor pool like it was his own personal bathtub. That individual has more tricks up his sleeve than David Copperfield. And for today's timing belt change on this Volkswagen, you will need a jack. You will need a pair of jack stands, a Phillips screwdriver, a flathead screwdriver, a T25 torch bit, an 8mm Allen wrench on a socket, and many millimeter wrenches available, starting with 19, 18, 16, another 12, and 10. We don't use the rest of the shit anyway, it just kind of sits in the fucking toolbox, doesn't it? And these are your firearms. They will come in handy. They will make this timing belt job fly faster than anything you've ever seen in your life. Now grab your jack stands. Get under there, jack it up, take the right side wheel off, and turn the wheel all the way to the right. Remember that wheel chucks are important. Don't sail out of your mama's garage. In order to get this splash guard off, you have to remove these two pieces. And the only way you're getting them off is with a set of these. So buy them. You will eventually use them regardless. Now pull the air duct out of the way. It is held down by two hose clamps and one 10mm nut. And now you will release the V-belt tensioner. Grab a 15mm wrench and grab onto the top of that square. Place the long 15mm on top of the tensioner. Wait, you can't get on it. Remove the hose on the power steering unit. You will be able to fall forward and you will be on. You will take a 16-penny nail and cut it down to 1 3/4 inch, and you will stick it in this line-up hole for the tensioner when you pull back. Push the nail into the hole. The tensioner is now completely retracted. Remove the coolant reservoir holding down by 2 Phillips screws. Now the tank is free. But you have to unplug a couple of things. First, overflow sensor, and then the overflow tube. Holy Jesus. What is that? Somebody forgot to drain the antifreeze. Get on it, scumbag! Now get yourself a piece of hose with a 1/2 inch inner diameter and run it right up on top of that nipple. And then drain the rest into the pan. Turn the valve 1/4 turn left. Now you turds have to keep track of all your bolts and nuts. I suggest that you make about 6 bags right off the bat. You're going to need an overflow screw. Those are 2 screws. The V-belt tensioner has bolts. The timing guard. The timing belt guard. Crank pulley and vibration dampener. And the water pump bolts. We will be replacing both belts, the V-belt and the timing belt. we will replace the tensioner for the timing belt, the water pump, the tensioner for the timing belt. When we replace this pretty little water pump, you will put fresh antifreeze on the O-ring before the installation. Don't mess that up. Now that your antifreeze is completely out of the overflow container, you can take off this clamp with a pair of pliers by squeezing them together. Now you want to take off these 3 lines. This lower one is pressure, this is fuel return, and over here we have the coolant. Remove all 3, note where they are on the rail before you remove them, or use markings. Once you have those 3 lines removed, take them up and put them and strap them to a windshield with either a tie strap or a bungee cord. And now we remove the power steering reservoir. Begin by removing this harness and clamp off of the bolt and nut. Remove the 10mm nut that is holding it to the surface. It is always good to have a nice manual to guide you through on your trip, especially when it comes to torquing nuts and bolts. Torquing measurements are important. Don't give me that shit that you think it's tight enough either. You see, son, bolts are kind of like vaginas. It doesn't matter if you think it's tight now, it's probably going to be loose later. Now disconnect the return line on the power steering reservoir, but leave this one intact. You are going to disconnect this and you're going to pull it back, all the way over here, out of your way. Now that you've removed the clamp, you don't want to make a big mess. So what you're going to do is tilt the power steering up, pull the hose out, keep one thumb on here, keep the other down on the here. Now remove the 3 bolts holding the V-belt tensioner. And don't forget to bag your bolts. Remember, when you put this tensioner back on, that this bracket sits in front of the tensioner, not behind it. If you do that, it will not line up. You will hear a noise, and you will start to freak out. Remove the V-belt from the bottom of the engine. You will basically be only using 2 sections of this book. We are now done with the tensioner. Separate your pages with pieces of paper. Now go back to the timing belt. Now remove this coolant line at this end. Now remove the upper half of the engine mount. Remove the back bolt on the main top engine support. And don't forget to keep bagging and tagging, son. Now before you pull off that engine mount, your engine must be supported. And that's what you want to do. Now remove the 2 main engine mount bolts. Now take out the engine mount from the vehicle and tag them bolts, son. Take the engine mount to the bench. Pull it apart and inspect the rubber inside of it. Look for dry cracks. If it is cracked, you will replace it. Now you must remove the rest of the engine mount that is bolted to the engine. One of the bolts is directly down here. Follow where it mounts to the block. The other one is back here. You've got one more underneath the vehicle, which is right there. And then she'll come off. Now's where it gets tricky. You need to lift the motor up about 3 inches, Private Pile, 3 inches! And take and break this bolt loose. use a breaker bar. If you think you're strong enough without it, then do it that way. While you still have it up 3 inches, you can get a socket right in here and get to this one as well. Now drop the motor down 3 inches and get the remaining bolt with a breaker bar. Snap it. You don't have much room in here. Just crack it free and ratchet it the rest of the way out with a smaller setup. Now take off the lower timing cover. 10mm bolts, you have 3 of them. 1, 2, and 3 is over here where you can't see it, but it's directly across from this one. Get started! Now take a 6mm Allen socket, place it over one of the 4 bolts holding the harmonic balancer on. Have a breaker bar stabilizing it, and then wrap them out. Usually, impacts can do it quicker without any movement. Remember not to take off the timing tensioner until after you've done this. Now, before you remove this dampener, there is a little dauber right here. I want you to mark that son of a bitch. Just like that. There. Isn't that pretty? Now remove the last 2 bolts that are holding on the lower timing cover. And don't forget to put those 2 bolts in with the rest of the timing belt guard lower. Now take the old tensioner all the way down with that recess bolt, until you can drop something through that hole. You see that small hole? It's a hole. And I bet you wish it had hair around it. Put a small pin through there and you will lock that piston down. The tensioner will not move. Once you have locked down the tensioner, remove the tensioner pulley. Now that you've removed the timing belt out of the way, take out the tensioner. 2 bolts. Move it out. The lower tensioner bolt is located here. Now this tensioner came with a quick release pin right there. Once you get the tension down on your tensioner pulley, you will release that pin. Now you can go ahead and remove the water pump. When you have all the bolts out of the water pump, pry the water pump away from the block. Like so. Make sure that you clean the water pump area thoroughly. Shiny and new. Remember that the inside lining of that water pump needs to be clean. I want that thing so clean that the Virgin Mary herself would be proud to stick her finger in there. Now that I've installed my water pump, I will tighten down these bolts to 11 pounds. And there she is. Now you're ready to install your tensioner. Put this bolt in the bell housing. You can't see it, you've got to get it in there. So start out, when you lay it down in there, keep your finger on it and put it in position. Feel around for the hole. Now, while you still have the engine mount that connects directly to the block, out of the way to the left side, you can sneak a torque wrench in here and tighten down that 10mm bolt to 11 pounds plus 1/4 of a turn. Now you're going to have to reinstall your little bolt to pull down your tensioner so that you can remove that pin right there. It's going to be a little bit of a bitch, but you'll get it in there. Make sure that you're lined up on the flywheel in the back of the engine. Check your hole. Make sure it's there. You're about to make sure permanently. Now, a word to the wise. Don't buy bolts from Mexico. This tensioner bolt had failed me from the very beginning once I took it out of the package. It was bent. I was pissed off. I wanted to shove this up somebody's ass. So I went to Ace Hardware and got the same bolt. It is a little bit shorter, but do not panic. You will have plenty of room to get it all the way down if you thread your threaded washer all the way to the end. Good night, ladies. Now, in case some of you have decided to use your old tensioner and you don't have a nice vise, you can use a C-clamp. You'd want to place it over there, the top, and pull down on it slowly. Wait 3 seconds and turn it a quarter of a turn. Wait another 3 seconds and pull it a quarter of a turn. And you will get it all the way down. Remember, every mechanic knows that you have to have patience when dealing with vehicles. If you have no patience, you will fail. You will throw shit around your garage. You will grab beer and say to hell with it. Before the C-clamp is removed, make sure, absolute sure, that pin is all the way in, all the way through the cylinder. This is a major amount of hydraulic pressure, and you don't want to screw that up. Once you have the pin all the way through, inspect inside the journal. Make sure there is no hydraulic oil spitting out. As you can see that this old one has oil that's coming out of it. That means you're going to need a new tensioner. So go out and buy a brand new one. Do not put this back in the vehicle, or I will punish you. Now, as you can see, the new tensioner bolt, which I installed, that was a little bit shorter than the original one that I paid $16.99 for. Always check the back of it. Feel underneath the tensioner as it's bolted on. Make sure that the bolt is all the way through the complete threaded area. You want to be. You do not want to strip this out. Don't even think about it. And as you can see, once this has been recessed, you still have plenty of room here to play with. So run her down. Also, when you go to Ace Hardware to get a better bolt, always look to make sure it says 8.8 on it. This Mexico piece of shit does not have nothing on it. It is worthless. It is a piece of shit. Now this timing belt that came with the kit by Contatec looks like a nice belt, but I don't trust who made it. I would rather trust an American brand, like this one right here. Gates. It's made in America. I have wedged a small screwdriver right inside the flywheel. It may not be enough to hold it, but make sure you keep an eye on it when you're putting the timing belt on anyway. Now, before you put your tensioner screw back in, make sure that you put a little dab of oil right on the tip. There is nothing better than a well-lubricated screw. Now that you've got your screw in place, put your finger underneath and make sure that the screw is outside the bottom of it. You want to get every thread available. Now pull down your torque. The book calls for 20 foot-pounds. We are going to go 22. Make sure you use a wobble head, 3/8 extension. Again, your line is right there. As you can see, it's on this side of the cam gear, and it runs along follow that side and go straight up with that point, right to where it meets. And you should have it right on the money. You cannot afford to be one tooth off. Now you look at this timing belt and you say, how the hell did you do that? Because when I got it to the water pump, I could not get it over there. How is it that you got that? Well, when you got the lower end of the crank on and everything is around here, you want to do this as like a two-person job. Someone is going to have to pull back on this crank cam until you can lift this right over the top of the water pump. Once you have seized it, take it off, check your marks, top and bottom, and see if she's right on the money. If she's not, you're in a world of hurt. And as you can see down below, I'm going to move in for you. Notice how the mark is just a tad off to the right. When I pull back on that crank, so did the top move as well. She moved just a little bit past it. This should be safe enough to spin her over 2 times and check your marks. Now pull out your pin that holds your tensioner down. You still have your bolt in place for the tensioner release, so it's not going to move. Resecure your block engine mount before you spin her over. Now that you've secured your block engine mount right here with this top bolt, so it's out of the way of the belt, you're now ready to spin her over a couple of times to check your marks. Now that you've spun the motor around 2 revolutions, you check your marks at the crank, at the cam sprocket, and at the back of the motor. If everything lines up, you are ready to start reinstalling everything back. Let us begin by removing the bolt from the tensioner. Alright, now, grab your 5 bolts for your lower timing belt cover and start there. Now that you've got your lower timing cover in place, you have 10mm head bolts. They will all be torqued at 7 foot-pounds. You say to yourself, well, Sarge, my 3/8 torque wrench doesn't go down that far. All I got is an inch-pound wrench. Well, run her down to 85 inch-pounds, and that'll be good enough. And now it is time to mount the pulley, the harmonic balancer, onto the crankshaft. The paint mark that you put on it before you took it off should match the same dot you left on the crank. And now it is time to use the brand new bolts from Volkswagen to install into the crank pulley. Do not use the old ones, you scumbag. And now for a 2-stage operation. You will take a breaker bar with a 19mm 12-point socket. You will put it on the center of the crankshaft. Then you will take a torque wrench and you will put a 3mm Allen on the end of it. Put it into there and pull her down to 18 foot-pounds. Do you understand that, ladies? Always rotate the crank to where you can get to the next bolt that you want to torque. Once you have torqued all 4 of those studs, I want you to go one more and check the first one that you torqued. And since your ass is still down in the dirt, tighten down the engine mount to 33 foot-pounds. Then get upstairs and tighten up the last 2 engine mount bolts to 33 foot-pounds. Pull, pile, pull! And remember, when you go after these 2 top bolts on this engine mount, you will have to jack the motor back up in the air so that you can get to that lower bolt. Don't forget. Now you can go ahead and install your brand new tensioner. Remember that the bracket stays on the outside of the tensioner, not the inside. Don't screw this up. And now tighten all 3 bolts for the tensioner down to exactly 18 foot-pounds. And now it's time to put on the upper half of the engine mount. You have a set of 5 bolts, all of which will be torqued differently. Pay attention. You will begin by torquing the large ones, the 74 foot-pounds. These 2 right here. Then back here, these will be put at 30 foot-pounds and 1/4 of a turn. And then this little bracket back in here on the frame will only get 18, no quarter turn. Once you've successfully set up your upper engine mount and torqued it to spec, you can now take down the jack that is holding up the motor. Now before we hook up this lower cooling line, which is going to be our next thing to do, we've noticed that there is a little bit of a leak right here. Perhaps it's time to change these clamps. Make sure you inspect it good and make sure that there are no cracks. Since this hose just came out of there real easy, I can assume that this has been leaking around the clamp. That clamp there is pretty much worn out. So off to the hardware store. Now that you've got these coolant lines all hooked back up, you're ready to move to the power steering unit. This reservoir must go back underneath this hose. Hold your finger over this because you know fluid is still in it. Then grab your hose that you put up here, not to drip out. Keep your finger over the top of it. And then move it over to it, plug it in, put the clamp on. Now tighten the single bolt that holds down your power steering reservoir to about 5 pounds. Now that you've mounted your power steering reservoir, open it up and make sure that it is still full and you have not lost fluid. Don't forget to put this retaining harness clip back on top of this bolt. Now you're ready to install this fart container, or otherwise known as the coolant reservoir. Now, before you put that coolant reservoir in place, check this clamp down here. Make sure that you replace it. These things go bad after a while. They're OEM. You're much better off with one that you can tighten down. After you've installed your hose, flip it up backward like this to get your clamp all the way up on there. Take 2 of your wires right here and clamp them back in place. Then install your plug. Now go ahead and secure the reservoir with the 2 screws that hold it together. Here and one over here. Now it's time to go ahead and put your fuel lines on. Your pressure side is here and your return is here. Your coolant line is right over here. The other end of the coolant line goes into the reserve. Now when you tighten smaller hose clamps like this one, never over tighten it. You'll notice that when you tighten it and over tighten it, this clamp will start to slide off to the right. Stop right there. Don't go any further. Hold your ground. And now it's time to go ahead and put on the V-belt. Start at the bottom while you have everything taken out and fish it up to the top. The V-belt for this 1.8 should look exactly like this picture. And now it's time to release the tensioner. Pull back on the 15 with a 15 millimeter and release the nail that I stuck in there. Now that you've released the tensioner, push back forward on it and make sure it's fully forward so that you know that you have tension on this belt. Then you're going to go over every pulley and inspect it. Make sure that the V-belt is in the groove on all sides. If it is hanging off a little bit, fix it! And now you are ready to put that lower intercooler tube back in place. I left the nut on the stud. That's the only one that holds it in place except for both of these hose clamps. Install it now! Quickly, move it out! Before you install that intercooler tube, make sure you put a little bit of antifreeze right on that little stud. It's really close to debris and highway crap. You want to make sure she stays good and she'll come off again. Now you want to put your splash guard on that protects the harmonic balancer. This baby right here. What you're going to do is come in at an angle and sneak it up behind the intercooler tube. It'll meet these two knobs. You will put these washers on the end of them. Then it is secure. Make sure you check the front of it. Over here. Make sure that this slides right inside of here. And then you have done it correctly. Now that you've got this rain guard completely secure, don't forget you got a small screw back here that has to go on. Then go ahead and put your rock shield right here back in place. You have 2 screws on both sides. And make sure it fits up right in this lip in the 4 designated areas. And now install your outer splash guard up inside the firewall. Now that you got your splash guard all in place all along the wall, now it's time to turn that wheel straight and put that wheel back on. Now that you got it straight and you got the wheel back on, torque that nice aluminum wheel to 125 foot-pounds. Make sure that before you put any torque wrench away, back it all the way back down to 0. Now reinstall your battery ground and step back away from the vehicle. Don't forget to reinstall your check plug on the back of the bell housing for the transmission. And for the finality of this event, we put on our sticker that we got from Gates showing the mileage and the mileage for the next timing belt change. Put a piece of clear tape over it so that the ink does not wear out. Good night, ladies. Well, that's it, ladies. From now on, you are no longer maggots. You join the brotherhood. You will eat, sleep, and shit thinking about your next automotive experience. And you will be faithful. You will twist your fingers and wrists more than any other man on the planet. Your garage is your bunker. Your dresser is your toolbox. Your bed is your creeper. Your slippers are made of steel and leather. Your bench is your dinner table. Your light has a cage round it. Your glasses are made of impact-resistant plastic. Your uniform is a jumpsuit. And the first and last thing that is the most important thing in this country is the United States Constitution of America. Do not let that slip out of your fingers. If you do, I will shove that Xbox up your ass.